This instruction outlines the process for developing a survey research proposal. As an example, we will use a study proposed for the surf brand OP Apparel. A copy of this proposal is included in the lesson. You will notice in this survey report proposal that it's just very simple. I won't expect fancy formatting for your proposal, but for any final reports, then you can make them look a little prettier. The first slide is your title slide, which you can create. This next slide is a table of contents, which I won't have you worry about for the proposal, but again, you would want to complete for a final report. Next is the executive summary, which cannot be completed until your data is collected, so you would skip that for the proposal too. Next, you have your background. OP Apparel Company became a leader in the surf brand industry and lifestyle apparel in the 1960s, making it one of the top competitors in its class. OP was sold to Iconic Brand Group in 2006 and became exclusively sold at Walmart stores in 2007. OP Apparel ended their executive agreement with Walmart and was planning to reintroduce itself at department stores, including Macy's and Nordstrom's, as well as its specialty surf stores that would carry OP and similar competitor brands. One of their goals was to revamp their website to encourage browsing and direct online sales. They were unsure how familiar young people were with the brand, but that is a primary audience that they hope to target, the millennial through Gen Z generation. So this first slide provides some background on the situation, and then this next slide outlines the problem and establishes the client's goals as listed on the RFP. Next, you want to zero in on the purpose of the specific study that's being proposed. In this case, a little more background is helpful. When they first started exploring this problem, OP had many questions that might be answered via different study methods. For example, one question that they had was, how do consumers perceive the OP brand? Do younger people perceive the brand differently from older audiences? They were also interested in understanding how each audience thought about surf brands and what influenced their purchases. And last, they were interested in what audiences thought about their website. To begin exploring these questions, they started with some focus groups. They had people look through their website, and then they asked them about it in the focus group discussions. Once they collected that information, they decided that they wanted to confirm the insights that they were gaining with some more comprehensive survey research. Thus, one survey that was developed focused specifically on younger audiences' perceptions of their website. Based on their focus group research, they suspected that males and females viewed their website differently. From their focus groups, it also seemed that people who were familiar with their brand responded to their website differently than those who had never heard of them before. They decided that they wanted to see if these trends held true for a more representative sample of the population. So, that's a lot of information. But in your slide deck, it can just be briefly summarized with a few bullet points to provide context for the reader. This is the information that was true for this particular situation. You don't need to make anything up for this part. You simply want to report on the purpose of your particular study and any context that's helpful for understanding that. Next, you want to identify your research questions or objectives. The objectives for the OP study were: first, to evaluate the millennial target market's perceptions and reactions to the OP website, and second, to determine if perceptions differ by gender or brand familiarity. Note that these are very broadly worded objectives designed to just generally explain the types of data that you want to collect in your study. Also note that they include objectives that specifically seek to identify potential differences in groups. Qualitative research such as focus groups and interviews are great for gaining initial insights, but they are best used to search for commonalities among a group of people. Since they were interested in looking not just for similarities, but differences in perceptions of several different groups, they needed to collect data from more people, which made a survey a good option. You should consider comparisons that you might want to make among your participants in crafting your own research questions or objectives for your survey study. In designing a study, you will need to consider who you are going to survey, when and how you will collect your data, and exactly what you're going to ask. All of that information is covered in the methods section of your study report. You might include this first slide, which just lists the sections of your method. It isn't required, but it is helpful for organization. First in your method, you should offer some justification for the appropriateness of the method you selected for your study. So on this slide, you'll see a brief explanation of the type of study that is conducted, in this case an intercept survey, as well as a justification for why a survey was appropriate for their particular purpose. You will want to consult your lessons on the uses and strengths of survey research for help in how to craft this justification. Next, you will want to report on the participants in your study. As outlined in the sampling unit, you will need to identify your population of interest, your sampling frame, and also consider how you will specifically recruit people for your study. The nature of surveys makes them appropriate for gathering a little bit of information from a lot of people, as opposed to interviews or focus groups that allow you to gather a lot of data from a few people. Surveys, therefore, typically involve collecting data from a larger sample size. First, you have to identify your target population. If you were able, you might be able to do a census where you survey everyone in your population. For example, surveying all employees or students in a class. Often, however, your population will be too large or difficult to reach to survey everyone. Thus, you will need to select a sample for your study. In the case of OP, their population of interest was millennials in the United States, primarily those who lived along the west coast near the ocean, but still far too large a group to do a census study. Here you see their target population identified as young people aged 13 to 25 in coastal cities. Before you can sample from your population, you need to establish your sampling frame. Ideally, your sampling frame should identify every single person in your population and ensure they have an equal chance of being selected to be in your sample. In the case of OP, there is no way that they could identify every millennial in the coastal states. Thus, they had to consider how they could identify potential people to participate in their study. There are some techniques you could use, such as random digit dialing, where they could sample phone numbers at random and then only collect information from people who answered who are millennials. In this case, their sampling frame would be people with phone numbers who identified as being within the specified age range. This would mean that millennials without phones or who did not answer would not be included in the study. Furthermore, it would be very costly and not very efficient sampling technique for this study. A professional research firm might use a sampling frame of millennials shopping at different major malls along the coast. This sampling frame would then only be limited to people who happen to be shopping at those specific malls and who were approached by the researchers when the study was done. This would be a limitation of the study, but a reasonable approach. Because students were doing this study, their access to the population was further limited. Their sampling frame was young people aged 18 to 25. They could not survey minors, so they surveyed those that were on campus at Cal State Fullerton between the dates that they were collecting data. Next, you need to explain your sampling strategy. To truly generalize out to a population, you need to use a probability sampling technique. In this case, there was no practical way to randomly sample people on campus, much less young people more generally. Just approaching whoever walks by is not random from a statistical perspective. Approaching whoever happens to walk by is convenient for the researcher, but it might bias results based on where you stand and who you approach. If you stand on campus in certain places, certain days and times, not everyone who goes to CSUF would have an equal opportunity to participate. And of course, you have online students who might not be on campus at all. Thus, it is non-probability sampling. The technique that was used, therefore, was convenient sampling of people aged 18 to 25 who agreed to complete the survey. They proposed quota sampling, where 10 students would stand at different spots, different days on campus to collect a minimum of 40 surveys each, half women, half men. Usually, convenient sampling is enough. Quotas are typically only necessary when people in a group you are interested in are harder to find, and so you need to intentionally be sure to survey enough of them so that you can make comparisons. So, in reporting your sampling strategy, you simply need to explain how you selected people to participate in your study. And you need to be sure to use appropriate sampling terminology. Last, for your participants, you need to report your proposed sample size. Appropriate sample size depends upon the size of your population. You can see the sampling lectures for details. Because their population was greater than 100,000 people, their target sample size was 400. If you do a survey for your primary research report, I would like your team to collect at least 100 surveys, which really isn't as many as you should have to confidently generalize, but it'll be good enough for the course. So for your proposal, you should list your targeted sample size. And then, if you actually do a survey for your primary research report, you can go back and list the actual number of people that participated. Next, you need to detail the procedures for data collection. For the OP study, they needed people to first look through their website so that they could ask people what they thought of it. So they set up laptops where people could come, look through the website, and then fill out the survey. As an incentive, they gave the participants a coupon for a local store. Often, however, you will not have any incentive to offer. Because the study was brief, the topic was not controversial, and the survey was anonymous, informed consent was limited. Participants were informed verbally along with a brief statement at the top of the survey. They were told they would be reviewing a company website and then fill out a survey about it. They were told that it would take about 10 minutes. Without an incentive, though, a survey should be limited to under 5 minutes. They were also notified that participation was voluntary and that their response would be anonymous. The researcher would not be able to see or track how they responded. And they were told that they would receive a coupon as a thank you for their participation. So this study was a little more detailed than most, but you can see how they outline their procedures here. In this slide and the second slide here. Now, the procedures for your studies will likely be much simpler, but you still need to list when and how participants were contacted or approached. You can word that in the past tense, even though for your proposal it hasn't happened yet. And then you should also outline informed consent procedures that were followed. Next, you will report on your measures. Naturally, if you're going to do survey research, you need to prepare your questionnaire. You want to be sure that questions are clear and targeted at the data you need. I recommend drafting your survey using online survey software, even if you plan to hand out surveys in person, because it will format your survey nicely and make data analysis easier. You can see copies of the OP survey in the lesson. On your measures slides, you should summarize your survey questions by reporting different categories and explaining how questions were asked. Typically, you will see much more details about the measures provided in scholarly reports. Usually, you do not have to detail too much about the measures in an applied report because people involved have typically seen the survey or can figure out the questions from the analysis that is done. Still, it is good practice to summarize your measures in your report since people can't see the actual questionnaire. Now, for your proposal, you aren't going to have any results yet to report. However, you can still leave the slides in there. That way, if you decide to actually do the study, you can just go back and fill them in. So, I'm going to click through the results and implications and recommendations and come down to this last limitation slide. Some limitations of a study may not be readily apparent until after the study is completed. However, there are many limitations that you can anticipate before you even begin. Consult the lesson Quantitative Survey Research for some insights on those. I want you to include limitations in your own proposals. They are not included here because you may be filling them in for OP in another assignment. So, this concludes the instruction for how to do a survey report proposal.